Hello, my name is Sean Lacey of Lacey Maths and Stats Consultancy, and this video is a short presentation on spaghetti plots in ggplot2 in RStudio. These plots are ones that I find quite useful when I'm in the data screening process of studies that I'd be involved in to kind of isolate, I suppose, participants that maybe might have had a protocol deviation, and this might help inform population allocation towards an intention to treat population or a per protocol population. So first I'm just going to look at creating the data frame first, or setting up the data frame. So and this, I suppose, the script here is very similar to the script that I would have used in other videos that would be in the ggplot2 series that I have up on the YouTube channel as well. So the first part here is where I'm just creating IDs. So we're looking at 20 participants. So looking at creating kind of 20 IDs here, then looking at measurements for these 20 participants across 3 time points. So line 9, 10, and 11 is looking at randomly selecting data points across these 3 time points, and then splitting these measurements with respect to between subjects factor, which has, I suppose, a factor that has 2 levels, this low and a high setting, and then putting it all together as a data frame, and this is the data that we get back. So you'd see the first column here is the ID, which is what we want to kind of see appearing in the spaghetti plot. Then we have the between subjects factor of the low and high setting, and then we have the measurements across the 3 time points. So the time point obviously here being a within subjects factor. Now, like everything, when we're doing these in RStudio or doing a lot of analysis in RStudio, we need the data to be in a long format as opposed to a wide format. And also then just want to just specify that the factors that we have so far created, which is the factor on line 12, factor 12 is actually being treated as a factor. So that's what line 16 is going to do. Line 18 and 19 to 20 was going to put it in a long format. And then by putting it in a long format, actually I'll just do that bit here first. So you can then see, look, we have this time kind of, which is essentially the within subjects factor. So I want to just isolate that now as an actual factor, or set that up as a factor here. So just relabeling the time points T1, T2, T3 as time 1, 2, and 3, and then putting it down as a factor. And this is what we end up with, okay? So first then is just to draw the spaghetti plot. So I'm going to just do it as kind of the default one. And then I'm just going to go through a few iterations of just how I would generally look, I suppose, at presenting spaghetti plots in my own kind of the research studies that I'd be involved in. So the first part here is I'm just going to loading obviously the ggplot2 library, but then it's going to looking at line 31. So I'm running the function ggplot. It's going to be, I'm looking at plotting it as a line. So it's just, if I explain the arguments here that we have here to this, so the x-axis is going to be the within subjects factor, the y-axis is going to be the continuous measurement, and then the group, and so the group is the between subjects factor. So that's going to be kind of what will actually, I suppose, essentially create the various types. What I'm looking at doing here is looking at line graphs, because that's going to be the spaghetti part of it. So the spaghetti parts will be broken up based on the ID of participants. And then I'm going to look at using facet grid for splitting it to between a low and a high factor. Okay, so this is just kind of nearly a default version. There's obviously loads of ways that we could do this, but just kind of get a sense of it first to kind of, I suppose, see, look, what direction we're going in. This is what we'd end up with. Now, this is not perfect, but I suppose it gives an idea to, I suppose, what we're working towards. So you can see, look, that there's 2 kind of spaghetti plots, a low and a high setting. How I find them quite useful when I'm looking at the data screening part of maybe a research study that I'm involved in, is I can just see here that it's isolating a participant here in the low setting that isn't following the overall trend of the other participants, and the same here in the high setting, that it's just isolating those participants. Now I could look at the colors of the spaghetti, the lines that I have here, and map them to the IDs over here, and we'll talk about that now later, but this, I suppose, just gives us an idea, look, of the direction this is going in, okay? Now, this is one way of doing a spaghetti plot. There's going to be a few tweaks that I'm going to make to it, but another way of doing it is where you map the, I suppose, the time points with actually points as well. So people can approach this differently. I'm just going to add on a small addition here. Look, I'm going to, where do I have it here? GOM point. I'm going to put in points kind of joining up, I suppose, the spaghettis together essentially. Okay, so if we look at this here like this, you can see it's coming in here. This is the plot that we have. Now, it's the same as the previous one, except here what we have is the points are just kind of, are essentially the end, or the time points here actually have a point on the actual graph. That's all it is here, okay? Now, it's not perfect. There's a few little tweaks that I generally would do to this, but this kind of gives, I suppose, is a nice starting point. Okay, so I suppose the next step for me as a default, and you see this from my previous videos, is to kind of look at the scaling and the labeling of axes. So that's often what I try to do next. So this is where I'd end up here. After that, then I suppose the issue that I'd have with this one, and look, I think we're moving in a good direction here, but over here in the legend, which is looking at the participant IDs, what I'd see here is I have ID dash repeated essentially 20 times, okay? And to me, I don't think we need that. So what I would look at doing here is one of two things. Either the ID measurement at the very start, I'd look at just relabeling that as opposed to saying it, calling it ID dash. I'd just call it maybe 1, 2, 3 and so on like that. That would be one easy way of doing it. Or here, just to kind of, I suppose, just to show a bit of text script that I would often use, is I'm going to use this as substring function that I would have got from Stack Overflow before. And what this is going to do is it's going to extract however many characters from the ID measurement that we have. So the ID measurement is ID as in ID dash, and then there's a code, there's a number. So the numbers then are 2 digits. So what I'm just looking at doing here is I'm loading this this function, I suppose, that's going to extract a number of characters from a string that I'd have. So ID being the string, and here I'm going to call it case, and I'm looking at taking the ID measurement that we've created at the very start and extracting the last 2 characters from it. Okay, and just to see how this would work, then is I'll just view this. This is it here. Okay, so what we'd have here is the last 2 characters for the ID measurement now have been extracted, and I'm just calling that case. So in this scenario, then I can just rerun the plot that I have here, labeling all the axes, scaling the axes, and so on like that. Rerun it, and this is what I'll end up with. And I think for me, this is just a bit tidier again, because what it's doing is it's just removing that ID dash that is repeated multiple times. Now, you could look at this and say, look, oh, the ID measurement that was created at the very start, that could have just been a bit tidier at the very start. And that's absolutely fine if that's the road you wanted to go down with. There's obviously no issue with that. And like everything with RStudio, there's more than one way of doing the same thing. Okay. My other thing, I suppose this. So I wouldn't present it like this yet myself. What I find can be quite useful when it comes to the interpretation is that the ID for participants is actually next to the graph. I find that a bit easier for the interpretation. So for example here, for the low setting for this factor, that the IDs for the participants, the 10 participants that are in here, would be next to that graph, and the same over here. I find that can be quite useful. So just to show you how, again, I would do something like that, is I would look at, and this is just a very quick fix here, is I would look at splitting the data, or more so filtering the data. So I'll use the filter function from the dplyr package, and I'm going to filter it based on the low factor setting for a factor and the high setting. So I'm going to produce 2 graphs. Then I pull the 2 graphs together using grid.arrange. So I'll just quickly show you the first one here. I'll run this off first here, like this. So this is just the low setting. You can see, look, I've labeled the axes, labeled the graph as low, and it's just focusing on the 10 participants that are in that low setting in this case. And it's the same script that I've used up above. All I'm doing differently here is I'm putting in a title for the actual plot. I repeat that then for the high, so I filter the data where I'm just looking at the participants that are in the high setting, run that off here, get this, and then I don't present it like that. I present them both together using the grid.arrange function as part of the grid extra package, run it like this, and this is the graph that I'd end up with. And what I find, this is often how I look at presenting my spaghetti plots. So here it's where on the left hand side you have the participants that are in the low setting, and here it's quite easy then to see, look, that it was participant 1 that has the low value here for at time point 3. And while over here then, if we look at this one here, you can see, look, that it's going to be, if you map the colors, you can see it's participant 20 that has the high one. You obviously could look at annotating on the graph then and doing a load of other things after that. But look, that's down to personal styling of doing spaghetti plots. But as a starting point, hopefully you find that this video is useful. If you like the video, then I'd appreciate a like on it, and maybe you might be interested in subscribing to the channel if you have not already subscribed, and you'll get updates to when more videos are being uploaded in the weeks and months ahead. Okay, that's it for now. All the best.